Hey everyone, my name's A. Roberts, and today we are going to be tier listing the most satisfying things that I find to do in the game of Dead by Daylight playing as the killer. Now, as always, this is just my subjective opinion. This is what I think, what I find satisfying, and how satisfying I find it to be. So feel free, let me know in the comments, where do you think differently than me? I love chatting with you guys down there. All right, so two things I want to explain before we dive in. First one is just not every icon here means what it means in the game. I'm representing thoughts I had here, or concepts of stuff that I find satisfying in the game, and I'm trying to represent it using, the best icon that I can. So sometimes it means what it means in the game, and sometimes it doesn't, but I'll explain it all as I go. So don't just jump to conclusions when you see a certain icon. Let me explain it, and then it'll make sense. Second thing I wanted to say is I'm not ranking anything that is killer specific. So I'm not going to rank Bubba's Chainsaw, for instance, or Trapper's Traps. I'm going to wrap those all into one thought and rank that instead, but I will rank killer perks. So everything I'm ranking applies to every killer in the game. So now, as always, I like to explain the scale here. So S is going to be extremely satisfying, A is going to be very satisfying, B is going to be somewhat satisfying, C is going to be not really all that satisfying, and D is going to be not at all satisfying. So I have included some things on here that I do not find satisfying to do or to face as the killer. With that explanation out of the way, let's get started. So we're gonna start out of the gate tonight strong with what I feel to be one of the most satisfying things in the game, which is mooring a toxic survivor. So we're not just talking any survivor here. We're talking the ones that flashlight stun you over and over and over again, teabag you on the other side of pallets after they've stunned you, work together with their teammate to use head-on to annoy the crud out of you, all of that kind of stuff. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm using toxic in a bit of a broad sense there. I don't actually hate all of that play style, but it can get on your nerves, especially if you're already getting tilted. And when they just keep doing it over and over and over again, it can start to wear on you. So to me, there is just about nothing more satisfying in the game than actually catching up with one of the survivors and being able to Mori them by the end of the trial. So we're gonna put that up in S tier. I think that is one of, if not the most satisfying thing to do in this game. So there you go. All right, the next one is grabbing a survivor off of a generator. I find anytime you can grab a survivor, whether it be through a window vault, whether it be while they're trying to do an unhook, or most of the time, even better, if they're on a generator and you can snatch them off, I find that to be more satisfying than simply downing them and picking them up. I don't know what it is to that. I think it's the fact that you can either sneak up on them, or because maybe they're getting so close to the end of that generator that they're willing to take the risk, but you're able to walk up to them, and instead of just smacking them and hitting them, you're able to pull them right off and you're immediately on your way to a hook. To me, that is more satisfying than just getting a normal down. So I'm gonna put that in A tier. I find that pretty satisfying. Not as satisfying as S tier, but I feel comfortable with it in A tier. The next one, similar to that, is grabbing a survivor out of a locker. Now, if you hear them get into the locker, or you see them get into the locker, it can still be pretty satisfying. However, I think it's even more satisfying when you can walk into a room and you kind of go, I think there was a survivor here, but I didn't see them leave, so let me check a locker, and then sure enough, you guess it right, and they're there. I find that to be, again, kind of like grabbing a survivor off a generator. I find that to be pretty darn satisfying, more satisfying than getting a normal down, and I find it pretty satisfying. So I'm gonna put it up in A. I would rather be able to either grab a survivor off a generator or find one in a locker than just to simply down them. Now, if I did that all the time, I'd probably get bored of that, but it's always more fun. It's a little more interesting. It's a little more out of the norm when you're able to do those two things, either grab them off of something or grab them out of a locker. And I like the locker finding animations. I think they're pretty fun. There you go. All right, this next one is going to be hitting a survivor through a pallet stun. So they stun you, but you're able to get the hit off before they do. That is at least somewhat satisfying to me. It's certainly more satisfying than getting stunned, but to me it is satisfying in the sense of you actually were able to get a hit off on them and, essentially burn a pallet as well, because, if they drop the pallet on you, they're using a pallet in order to try not to get hit, but if you can still hit them, then they've dropped the pallet, they've used one of their resources, and it didn't work because you were still able to hit them. Now, technically they can make distance off of that. In fact, they could make more distance because now they have the sprint burst after getting hit. However, for the most part, I find it at least somewhat satisfying to hit a survivor through a pallet stun. So I'm going to put it in B tier, which will be our kind of somewhat satisfying tier. And I'm also OCD, so I want to align everything as perfectly as I can. So here we go. All right, the next one is going to be hitting a survivor through a flashlight stun. So similar to pallet stun, but a survivor flashlight blinds you, but you're still able to track them by sound, and you get the hit off and you actually connect. Again, similar to the pallet stun, they were trying to do something to prevent you from being able to hit them. They were trying to do something to slow you down in the game, but you still are able to connect. You're still able to get the hit, maybe even the down. And so I'm gonna put that, it's at least somewhat satisfying, but I kind of feel like it might be, I don't get as satisfied as I do on these, so I'm gonna leave it down in B tier, but I find it a little more satisfying than this one, than hitting a survivor through a pallet stun, but I don't feel enough to put it in A, so I'm gonna leave it down in B. There you go. Flashlight save. Avoiding one. This is avoiding a flashlight save. So you pick up a survivor, and on the way, another survivor is trying to blind you with a flashlight and get this flashlight save. And you're able to, and we're assuming they've actually timed it well, maybe just slightly off, so that you're not fully locked in the animation, but pretty darn close so that you actually have to do something. So we're not just talking about they blew the flashlight save. It's not really satisfying if they blow the flashlight save, right? But if they come really, really close and you're able to avoid it, I find that somewhat satisfying in the game. More so than just playing the game like normal, at least. So I would say that's somewhat satisfying. They try to get it off. They come very, very close to getting the flashlight save off, and you're able to avoid it by looking up, looking down, looking away, whatever you do. Double points if you're able to actually hit them while they're trying to get the flashlight save as well. However, that's not what we're ranking. We're ranking just avoiding the flashlight save altogether. The next one, kind of like pallets, hitting a survivor through a pallet stun, hitting a survivor through a flashlight blind. This is hitting a survivor through a window. Again, I find that just slightly more satisfying than just hitting a survivor. You're able to actually get the hit off as they're vaulting the window, or even like sometimes there's that weird networking stuff where they're actually on the other side of the window, but you're still able to hit them. So anytime that's able to happen, it's pretty satisfying. Well, we'll put it in B. It's somewhat satisfying, but somewhat, maybe B is kind of like more satisfying than just playing the game normally. There you go. Okay. Now I know this is the icon for Jolt, but that's not what we're ranking here. I'm talking about regressing a gen to 0. So a gen is like at least 50% or more. You go, you use whatever perks, you damage that generator, and by the end of the trial, that gen has regressed to 0. That's at least somewhat satisfying because, just knowing that they made, 90 seconds of progress on this gen or more, and you were able to get it to 0 by the end of the trial, it's a bit disheartening to them, and it's pretty satisfying to see, hey, you guys got that gen close, and now it's not close. It's pretty fun to see. So I'm gonna put that in the somewhat satisfying tier. Popping a generator. Just being able to walk up to a generator and take 25% off the top of it. I find that highly satisfying. Just being able to go in, they've completed 50% of it, and you pop the thing, and now it's down to 25% instantly, or they're close, they're almost at 100, and you pop that thing, and it's 75, and then regressing. Oh, that is very, very nice. So we're gonna put that up in A tier, satisfying. I find using Pop Goes the Weasel a very satisfying perk to use. Lethal Pursuer. This is a perk that I find pretty fun to use. Now, I underestimated this perk for a while. I thought to myself, why would I use a perk that's only available for the first 8 to 9 seconds of the match, and then it's gone? It just felt like a waste of a perk slot to me. However, I started using the perk, giving it a shot, and I found just how much pressure you can put on a team almost immediately. When you start that match and you load in, and the first thing you see is a clump of 3 survivors next to a gen, and then they all hop onto that gen thinking, hey, we're gonna get this thing done pretty quickly. And then I'm there within seconds to split them off. They go running. Now you've got maybe 1 survivor working on a gen over here, but the other 3, or maybe they all 4 started in the same area, and now you've got them scattered. It's just fun to me to put extra pressure on a team of survivors right at the beginning of the trial and make them go running. There's something satisfying about that, at least somewhat satisfying. So I'm gonna put that here in the B tier. I find it somewhat satisfying to use Lethal Pursuer. It's not the best perk by any means, but I find it to be a good perk, and I enjoy using it, and I find it somewhat satisfying to use it. This one is a weird one. I also didn't really run this perk for a while, but then I started trying Franklin's Demise. So basically, a survivor is running away from you. You hit them with your basic attack. They're gonna drop that item, and that item is gonna automatically start decaying over time. And so if you knock a survivor, if you hit a survivor and they go down, and then you hook them, then that thing is sitting, that flashlight or that med kit or whatever they're using is sitting over there losing charges as they're on the hook. And they're just sitting there going, oh man, my flashlight, it's going dead right now. If you hit them with a basic attack and they're in the healthy state, so you injure them, they drop their item, and then they've got to run away, and they've got to figure out a way to come back to pick back up their item. They got to remember where you hit them, and they've got to get back to their item with you chasing them. And so it's fun to add an extra measure of stress in the chase for the survivors. So it's not just, oh, I got hit, or oh, I got downed. It's that plus, there goes my item, and if I don't get back to it soon, it's gonna be useless. And so it's just kind of fun to add a little extra, I guess, stress to the chase for the survivors. So because of that, I'm gonna put it in B. I don't find it, I don't love doing it to survivors all the time, but when I do run the perk, it's satisfying, at least somewhat satisfying, to add that extra layer of stress, that extra layer of complexity to the chase. So there you go. I'll put it in somewhat satisfying. All right, our next topic is face camping. Yeah, I don't find face camping fun or satisfying at all. Now, I don't want you to misunderstand me. I am not saying playing Bubba is not satisfying. That's not what I'm indicating here. And I'm not saying that all Bubbas camp. I'm just saying, like I said, I chose icons that I felt best represented the topic, and there's maybe one killer that stands out as stereotypically the one that tends to camp more often than some of the others. Maybe. Kind of. Yes, that's exactly why I used him for the icon for camping, for face camping specifically. Proxy camping is maybe a little bit different of a story. I can make arguments for certain situations where you may proxy camp and it may be a little more satisfying, I guess, but I find face camping extremely unsatisfying. I find it very boring. I find it it's not cheating because it's part of the game. It's something you can do as the game, and it's not something, the developers have actually built perks into it to counter it. So I feel like it's definitely not cheating, but in my opinion, I feel it's a bit of a cheap way to play. Anytime that I do it, I feel like I'm being cheap. I feel like I could play in a way that is still competitive, but is more fun for me and more fun for the survivors. And so in certain situations, I may choose to proxy camp when it comes to, especially the farther along in the trial we are. So if it's at the end of the trial, all the generators are done, the exit gates are powered, maybe they're even open, like I'm probably not going to wander too far from the hook at that point. However, I can't even bring myself to face camp in that situation because it's boring to me and it's not satisfying at all. So I'm not actually trying to make any statements about face camping other than I find it completely not satisfying and a boring way to play this game. And I would rather lose completely than to face camp and get a sacrifice that way. But that's just how I feel. I'm not saying there might not be situations, but they would be so rare. And I don't really feel like I've ever come across one where it's like, unless I'm like really upset at a toxic survivor and I'm like, even then I just have a really hard time face camping and do not find it a satisfying way to play at all. So it's going in D tier for me. If you choose to face camp, that's on you. I'm not trying to insult that play style right now, but I find it very unsatisfying. So it's going in D. All right, again, using a perk because it looks like a tunnel, I'm gonna talk about tunneling. So I'm gonna put tunneling above face camping because, and some people may disagree with me here and that's fine, I feel like there are situations and certain killers where tunneling is advantageous, at least mild tunneling, where you maybe switch between two survivors back and forth. That's still, I guess, technically a form of tunneling, but I don't find tunneling as bad or boring as face camping, but I do still find it not very satisfying to tunnel on a survivor. Maybe if they're being toxic, maybe if they're purposely trying to annoy me or frustrate me or get me tilted, then tunneling, again, I don't really feel like it's satisfying, but it feels a little more justified than face camping to me. So I'm not going to put it as low as face camping, but I don't find it a satisfying way to play the game. I like to at least go between two, if I can spread it out as many as possible. But as we know, this game is built kind of around, if you don't tunnel at least between two survivors, it becomes very, very hard for the killer to win the match. So I don't find it a satisfying way to play, but sometimes I find it a more necessary way to play than, I don't ever find face camping necessary. And like I said, I would rather lose than face camp, but I'm willing to, in certain circumstances, to tunnel if I have to try to be competitive, if that makes sense. But again, I try to very much limit that. I try to at least bounce between two different survivors if I can, because I want people to have fun. I'd rather lose and we all had fun than for me to get a 4K by face camping and tunneling, if that makes sense. To me, that's not a satisfying way to win. I'd be more satisfied losing than I would by winning by employing some of those methods. So again, you may tunnel, you may face camp. We can have that conversation in a different video. Point is, to me, feel free to disagree with me. Let me know down in the comments. To me, tunneling is not very satisfying. Face camping is not satisfying at all. So there you go. All right, so the next one is using the killer's secondary ability. So whatever their secondary attack is, so the huntress's hatchets, trapper's traps, the clown's bottles, whatever it be, the plague's vile purge and the corrupt purge, all of that, whatever their secondary ability is, beyond their just M1 attack, being able to use that competently. So you start off with a new killer, you have to learn how to use their special attack or their special ability, and then you get to a point where you're able to use that very competently. You're able to use it to actually turn the tide of the match in your favor. I find that very satisfying when you kind of master a killer's ability and are able to use it effectively. I find that very satisfying. So we're going to put it up in A tier. Depending on the killer, I could probably even put it in S tier. Like if you get like Nurse, for instance, and you master Nurse, that could probably go in S tier. Some of the other killers, maybe more B tier, like mastering their abilities. They're kind of more boring, easy to master. I might put that in B tier. So I'm going to average it out. I'm going to say most killers are probably learning and mastering their ability, I would put in A tier, and the few that would go in S tier, there's also a few that would go in B tier. So I feel comfortable averaging it out and putting it in the A tier. There you go. All right, the next one up is getting a 4K. So you wipe all the survivors. And so we're not talking a 3K and a hatch, even though I'd still count that pretty much a win. A straight up 4K, I find very satisfying, especially if you're able to do it without tunneling and camping and having to resort to that type of strategy, in my opinion. A 4K, a clean 4K, I find to be very satisfying. So we'll put it up in A. All right. This one is, I know these are just hooks, but I'm using it to represent the basement hooks. So when you get a basement hook, but not just one, when you get multiple basement hooks, that's a lot of fun to me. And it's just very, very satisfying to see, you know, kind of the survivors in that bit of a predicament to where they are having to scramble because they've got multiple of them in the basement. And then one of them has to come into the basement to unhook them. So at one point, you're going to have at least 3, maybe all 4 survivors in one location. So you know that very few, if any of them, are working on gens and they're kind of in a bad position, and you will be alerted the second they take someone off that hook. I've actually had it where the survivors don't even wait for me to get out of, like, Killer Shack, for instance. Like if the basement's in Killer Shack, I've been in or just around Killer Shack and they start unhooking, and it's like, guys, what are you doing? Like, let me get out of the area first before you unhook. I had one survivor once hide in the basement. They somehow snuck their way into the basement like a sneaky little ninja. They got into the basement while I was grabbing someone else to bring them down. So there was already one on the hook. I was getting another from outside Killer Shack, and one of their buddies, snuck down into the basement, hid. I had no idea they were there. I hooked the second survivor, and I'm walking out, and I'm not even, like, I think I was either still in Killer Shack or just outside Killer Shack, and they already were unhooking people from the basement. It's like, guys, I don't know where the 4th is. I have no idea. They might be across the map. I know where 2 of you are now, and now I know where a 3rd is. Where do you think I'm gonna go? Like, at least let me get away from the basement first. Because again, I don't like to camp. I don't like to tunnel. So I put them in the basement and I try to get out of there. It's just a funny story. But all that to say, having multiple survivors on the basement hooks at a single time, I find to be at least somewhat satisfying. Like, it's not like, oh my gosh, so amazing. Like, I feel so good about my gameplay right now. But I find it pretty satisfying, more satisfying than having multiple survivors on just hooks anywhere else in the environment. Like specifically the basement hooks, I find to be slightly more satisfying to get survivors in, and having multiples on the basement hooks even more so. So we're gonna put it in somewhat satisfying just because I don't know. I maybe could move it up a tier, but I'm going to leave it there for now. All right, closing hatch. This one is also something I find somewhat satisfying. If I can find hatch and I can close it before the last survivor can get to it, that's pretty fun. I find that pretty satisfying. I'm actually going to move that up a tier. I find that very satisfying. If I can get to hatch before they do and close it, it's just something that changes up the normal monotony of a match, because not all matches go to the hatch. So it's kind of fun when it does, and I'm able to get there first and I'm able to close the hatch. I find that pretty satisfying. Similar in nature would be giving the last survivor the hatch. I find that to be at least somewhat satisfying. Now, I know there are some survivors out there who get upset when the killer gives the last survivor hatch. I am not one of them, and I don't really understand that. I think there's nothing wrong with, playing a fair match and then getting to the end and saying, Now, I understand it if, like, the survivor you give hatch hasn't played well. Like, if they've just hid in a bush somewhere and you've never even seen them the entire match because they've just been hiding, they've been in lockers, they've been in bushes, they haven't been working objectives, and their entire team is running around trying to repair generators, and you end up taking out their entire team, and then they just go whoop-de-doo-de-doo, and you give them hatch. Like, I would completely understand being upset at that point. And those aren't the survivors I like to give hatch. I like to give hatch to survivors who have played really well, who have shown that they're better than me almost, or as good as, like, they've played a really good trial. I've just one-upped them, or I one-upped their teammate, or they got, something didn't go their way. The spawns didn't, whatever it is, something didn't go their way, and they had a tough match, but they played well. I like to reward that with hatch, or letting them go out the gates. I find that somewhat satisfying to do, be able to extend that courtesy. Now, I know it like kind of breaks lore, so I get people who are wanting it. It's like, no, you're supposed to be a bloodthirsty killer. You just kill all the survivors, and they have to earn it. But to me, sometimes a survivor will impress me with the way they play, and it's been a really good match. I've had a lot of fun. I've already got 3 sacrifices. So in those cases, I find it somewhat satisfying, at least, to give that survivor hatch. But that's me. You don't have to agree, and that's totally fine. But for me, I find it somewhat satisfying to give a survivor who has fought well the hatch. There you go. And I don't always do it either. Like, it's not something that I'm going to do every single trial. It's really just, hey, if somebody has really impressed me and I feel like they've really had a hard time. Like, sometimes, it's like you have 2 DCs at the top of the game. And it's like, okay, you had no chance of winning this game. So I have the blood points for the DCs coming to me. So I'm happy to give you hatch and you've earned it by just sticking it out in that case to me. So all that to say, there are certain circumstances, not every circumstance, not every trial do I like giving hatch, but there are certain circumstances I like giving hatch and I find it at least somewhat satisfying. So there you go. 3-genning a team. If you can successfully and intentionally, so sometimes I unintentionally 3-gen a team, or you might say they 3-gen themselves. Not as satisfying. However, if I can 3-gen a team, so if you're not aware what 3-genning is, it's basically when you get the final 3 generators in close proximity to each other and you're able to patrol those 3 generators pretty quickly and prevent the survivors from being able to finish them. It makes it very, very difficult. They almost have to have all 4 survivors still up at that point, or they have to play extremely sneaky, because you can basically, when you properly 3-gen, you can bounce from generator to generator. You can keep regressing them, especially if you have the perks to be able to do so, but you can keep regressing these generators. You can keep them down to 0. If you properly 3-gen, it becomes very, very, very difficult for the survivors to be able to finish the trial without you catching them. So that being said, if you do that on purpose, it can't happen on accident, but when you do it on purpose, I find that to be very satisfying. I'm gonna put it up. I'm gonna put it up in S tier. I may not find it as satisfying as Mori in the Toxic Survivor, but when you can purposely 3-gen a team, I find it extremely satisfying. When it's like, yeah, haha, I did that. That was me. So, anywho, all right, this next one, being a quality person in the endgame chat. Not being toxic, not belittling the other side, just being a quality person. I'm gonna put that in extremely satisfying. You guys might have picked up on the fact that I try to be a nice guy. Now, I have my moments where I get tilted or I get upset, but to me, just being an upstanding person in the endgame chat, giving a GG's, giving some encouragement, being nice, saying good luck on your next trials. Hey, great dead hard there. That was excellent timing. That play really impressed me. Just being a good person in the endgame chat, to me, that's pretty stinking satisfying. So that's all I'm gonna say on that one. So the next one, I'm using dead hard as the icon. This one was maybe a bit of a stretch. The concept that I'm trying to represent here is correctly guessing a survivor mind game. So survivors and killers pretty much all game long have to try to play different mind games on each other. The whole point is whose mind games are going to work better. And so when you can correctly guess and anticipate and basically foil a survivor mind game, it's pretty stinking satisfying. So they try to bait you to do one thing, but they're actually going to do another thing to counter it. And then you're able to maybe fake that thing and then counter their mind game. That's pretty exciting. A lot of times it's just a guessing game, but even when you guess right, that's pretty fun, I think. So I'm gonna put it up into the A tier of pretty satisfying. Why are you bouncing? Okay, thank you. Driving my OCD crazy here. Okay, all right. What was this one? Oh, okay. So this one I'm gonna use to represent getting your first hook, or probably more specifically, getting your first sacrifice. So this only ever happens once, right? It is the first time you play killer, the first time you get a sacrifice. So that may have been your first trial. It may not have been your first trial. Whatever it is, the first time you're able to actually get a survivor to 3 hooks to where they are sacrificed, that is pretty satisfying, I think. I remember vaguely the first time this happened for me, and I'm gonna put it up in A tier. So everyone past that, just, satisfying, but just normal part of the game. Your first one, however, that's satisfying. A little more satisfying than any of the ones that will follow, or most any of the ones that will follow. Let's put it that way. So your first hook, your first sacrifice, that's pretty stinking satisfying. All right, this next one, you take a hex perk or perks, and it stays up the entire trial, especially now in the Michaela Jonah meta, the boon meta. If your hex perk can stay up the entire trial, that's pretty stinking satisfying. That's a lot of bang for your buck. Especially if there's a Michaela or a Jonah, but now it's getting even harder to tell now that people are unlocking the teachable perks on other survivors. But if there's a Michaela or a Jonah in the lobby and your hex perk stays up the entire time, oh, that is satisfying, my friends. I am not, I basically, when I see a Michaela and I see a Jonah, I go, if I'm gonna, basically I clear out all my hex perks whenever I see one of them in the lobby. But occasionally I'll still run one. And especially in those cases, when that hex doesn't get blessed or cleansed the entire trial, wow, that's satisfying. I go in and I just expect to lose them now, especially in the new boon meta. However, when they stay up all trial, oh, that can be pretty satisfying. So I'm gonna put that up in A tier. All right, let me move the rest of these so y'all can see it. Okay, all right, I said Dead Hard might have been the biggest stretch on an icon. I think this one's the biggest stretch, actually. I have no idea what icon to use to represent this concept, so I chose Agitation just cause. But the idea being watching yourself get better as killer. So over time, just watching yourself improve, become better at reading survivors, become better at anticipating what they're gonna do, become better at managing generators, become better at using the have various killer abilities. Just watching yourself become better at playing killer is pretty satisfying. I'm gonna put that up in A. I like it. It's funny how I started with so many things in B and now I'm moving a lot of things into A, but I just find it very satisfying to just get better at the game. So this would apply with survivor or killer, but we're talking about satisfying killer stuff. It's a weird statement to make, to that collection of words leaving my mouth. It's weird. That's weird. But anyways, all that to say, context, playing DBD, getting better at playing killer in DBD is pretty satisfying. So getting better at any game, but watching yourself be able to improve, be able to learn survivors, be able to learn how to play various killers, just improving at the game. That's pretty satisfying. There you go. All right, this next one, having a survivor die on the hook. So you knock them down, you pick them up, you put them on a hook, and then you go around and you chase other survivors, and suddenly you hear that sacrifice sound, that boom. And you're just like, what the heck? Oh, they just let him die on hook. I don't find that satisfying at all. I feel bad for that survivor. I feel upset with the team that just let them die on the hook. That's frustrating to me. I am frustrated on behalf of that survivor that their team just left them there, especially the way I play, which is I usually try to just completely leave the area. We're not talking about, the very end where, maybe you've got a survivor on the second hook and they've got all the generators done and you're fighting just to get that one sacrifice. So you're kind of proxy camping the area. You're sticking close and they just decide, hey, we're out. Because there's times where I get on the hook and the exit gates are open and I tell my friends, I'm like, hey, just leave. Don't even try. I'm just satisfied if everybody else can get out and I can be the distraction. Like, I'm satisfied with that as when I'm playing Survivor. So I understand there's some end game situations where this may happen, where survivors may let another survivor just die on hook. But I'm talking about, this is their first hook, or maybe you put them on the second hook and you've basically left them and forgotten about them. It's like, I'll come back when I get the little notification, but I'm going over here and then nobody goes to save them. That's not satisfying at all. We're not talking I'm camping them. We're talking I'm not even close to them and they just get left on the hook. That's not satisfying. So I'm going to put that in D, and if for some reason I am face camping the hook, securing that sacrifice, then I'm camping and I don't find that satisfying. So I still don't find it satisfying when they die on hook because of it. So there you go. All that to say though, when I play, I'll put them on a hook and I'll usually try to leave the area. And when they die on hook, I'm like, what the heck? What did you guys do? What have you been doing? Go save them. Like, I purposely left them alone. I don't know. Now there's other situations where, maybe the survivor coming in to save them, you're able to pick them off and then you run them around and chase them and nobody else comes over to save them. And then, they die on hook. That's a different situation, but I'm talking specifically about you just left that survivor alone. You've walked away and then they die on hook because their team just didn't care enough to wander over there and get them off the hook. That stinks. That's just like, there's nothing satisfying about that. That is a non-satisfying sacrifice to me. So there you go. I just get frustrated on their behalf. So it's D tier. So this next one is a survivor disconnecting from the match. And I'll be honest, I have a bit of trouble ranking this one. It's not an easy one for me to rank because it's so situational. It depends on the situation, whether or not it's satisfying or not satisfying. So I'll just say, first off, like a survivor just disconnecting for no reason, just you're playing and their internet goes out and they DC. That's not satisfying at all. I don't look at that and go, yes, now there's one less survivor and I've got an easy win here, because it in most cases, that just means like, yeah, I've got an easy win ahead of me. A team of 3 does still stand a chance, but if the DC happens at the beginning of the match, it can be very, very difficult for them. So, just somebody disconnecting for no reason, not satisfying at all. Somebody disconnecting for a dumb reason, also not satisfying. I've pulled people off of totems. I walked up to a guy one time, he's working on my totem. I get close to the totem. I'm thinking I'm just going to scare him off the totem and hopefully I get there in time before he can cleanse it. And I get there and I'm like a meter or 2 away from the dude and he's not moving. And I go, oh crap, he must be really close to finishing this thing. So I get up close to him and then I mean to grab him off, but I don't know, there was a weird glitch, or maybe in my panic, I held M1 too long and I did a lunge instead of a grab. And so I actually like lunged past him and missed him and hit the wall. And you would think at this point he would like go away. No, he's still working on the thing. He wasn't close enough because he's still working on the thing. He doesn't cleanse it. So he's still far enough away that he hasn't, like, it wasn't worth sticking it out. And then I have time to go through my stun animation, my missed attack animation, and pull him off of the thing. And then he DCs. And I'm like, dude, that is not my fault. You were just like, you were tunneling on that totem and I pulled you off of it. Like, you had 14 chances to escape and you took none of them. You just decided to stick it out and then I grabbed you and you're mad about it. Like, that's not my fault. To me, that's a dumb reason to DC. Not very satisfying when a survivor does that for a dumb reason, because it just puts their team at a disadvantage. And then it's like, oh, well, that match is a lot easier for me now. I get the blood point bonus from it. So there you go. Your team just got hurt, did nothing to me. So disconnecting for dumb reasons, not very satisfying. So I don't usually play very dirty, but I could understand, leaving someone slugged out on the ground around them DCing stuff like I could understand some, you know, justifiable reasons. However, I don't usually play like that, if ever. I don't know that I ever played dirty like that. Now, the situation that I find satisfying when a survivor DCs is when I'm playing fair and I just outplay them and they don't like it. Especially toxic survivors that are trying to mess with you, trying to have fun with you, trying to get you tilted, you know, try to get you upset and make you play worse. And then you just play better and then you end up beating them and they don't like that. And so they DC. That, my friends, that can be pretty satisfying. So for that reason, I'm going to put it in B just because it really depends on the situation. You know, you're playing fair and you just one up them and they don't like it, so they DC. That can be mildly satisfying. So I'm going to put it up in B and leave it there for that reason, but also know that like not every DC is equal. So DCs that just happen for dumb reasons or for, you know, no explainable reason whatsoever, maybe their internet goes out, I don't know. Those things are not very satisfying. But when you can just play better than them and they don't like that you can play better than them and so they DC, they just have a little temper tantrum and they DC thinking they're going to one up you or something because you beat them at the game because you just played better or they played bad. Like survivor temper tantrums can be pretty satisfying. So yeah, there you go. Cheers. All right, this next one. This is grabbing a survivor in the exit gates. So you down a survivor, but it's not a normal down. You actually down them in the exit gates and you're able to snatch them before they're able to crawl across the threshold and escape the trial. That is pretty stinking satisfying. More satisfying than getting a normal down because normal downs happen all the time, right? Not every day you're able to grab a survivor out of the exit gate. So to me, I'm gonna put that up in pretty satisfying. There we go. All right, this next one. I chose Meg just because I like Meg as a survivor. And so I chose her to represent a good survivor team. There you go. I'm not saying Meg's the best survivor. I'm not saying all Megs are great players. I'm just saying that I like Meg. So I chose her to represent the good survivor team. So this one, the thought behind this one is playing well against a good team of survivors. So this is a team of survivors. Maybe they're better than you. Maybe they're just really, really good. Whatever the scale is, you're playing against a good coordinated team of survivors, probably a SWIF of 4, and you actually play well against them. Whether or not you get the 4K, whether or not you get, you know, regardless of how many sacrifices, you know, you just played well. Maybe they were way better than you and they, you know, all escaped, but you said, hey, I didn't fall for a lot of their tricks. I played well, you know, whatever it is. Maybe you got the 4K, whatever it is, you just know you played well against a team of very, very competent and very coordinated survivors. That is pretty stinking satisfying. I'm gonna put that up in A. I maybe would even, depending on the situation, I might even put it up in S, but I would say that that is pretty satisfying. To play well, regardless of what that means to you, to play well against a good coordinated team of survivors is always a fun time and always pretty satisfying when you get to the end of it. So there you go. All right, second to last one. We're moving along here. So this one, again, I know what offering this is, but I'm using it to represent survivors giving up. You're chasing a survivor and they just stop. You go after a survivor and they just go start standing next to hooks because they just want to, you've beaten them or they don't care anymore and they just want you to put them on a hook to get the trial over with. They're not going to DC, so I'm happy about that. They don't want to DC, but they give up instead. I'll put that in C because it's not as bad as when they just DC for no reason, but when they want to just give up, it's not fun anymore. It's not fun just to, you know, walk up to a survivor who's standing still and smack him and put him on a hook. That's not fun. So I'm going to put it in C. The only reason why it's in C is because to me, the dumb disconnects are in D and I want to put it slightly higher than that because I'd rather, you know, kudos to them for sticking it out and not just disconnecting because they don't like how the trial's going, but it's still not very satisfying. So I'm going to put it in C. There you go. All right, this one. Those of you who saw my Survivor Stereotypes video know exactly where this one's going. And if you didn't see that video, I'll summarize it for you real quick. I'll also put it in the card above me, so if you want to go watch it, you can. However, I basically said there are two types of stereotypical Claudettes that I find. One I love, one I just despise. The one I love is the baby Claudette. This is the, you know, survivor who just got the game. They start with Claudette because her perks seem really good and they don't have enough context to realize that there's better perks out there, more team-oriented perks out there. And so they run Claudette because, you know, healing yourself sounds good. They have no idea what they're doing. They're wandering around the map. These are the baby Claudettes. I love these Claudettes. I will give these Claudettes hatch because I just love them. I want to nurture them. I want to be a nice killer. I want them to have fun playing the game. So I want to take care of them. I just feel an affection for these baby Claudettes. The second type of Claudette, however, I do not feel any good feelings towards. This is the player who has picked her just because they know that she's hard to find and they just want to hide in bushes, hide in lockers, not really work on gens, and then slip out through hatch because they just sneak everywhere all the time because you can't find them. These type of Claudettes annoy the crap out of me because they're not good team players. They're not fun to face as a killer and they're not fun to play with as survivors. So they're like doubly annoying in that way. So I'm sitting there frustrated when I see a Claudette and I can never find her because I know she's sneaking around. You know, I end up wiping the other three and then I've got to find hatch before she gets out of there because I know she's just sat around. She's tucked away in a locker somewhere waiting for hatch to open. And I'm not saying every Claudette player is like that. So if Claudette's your main, hey, good for you. Just don't play that way. Work on gens. But But that being said, there is a type of Claudette that just sneaks, doesn't really work on gens, just tries to sneak around the map because they know they can. It's not fun to play against, but I'm also frustrated for their teammates because I know they're not working on gens. Because I take out all their teammates and they've still got 4 generators up and I'm going, where are you? I don't know where you are. You should have been working on gens the entire time. This type of Claudette annoys the crap out of me. And so this last one, kind of just to have a bit of fun here at the end, is to say you're in a game, you're in a trial against one of these Claudettes who's just sneaking around, not working on gens, hiding in lockers, doing whatever, and then you find them. That's pretty satisfying. You're able to close hatch before they get to it. Also satisfying. This, my friends, I'm gonna put an A tier. It's not the most satisfying thing in the game, okay? But pretty stinking satisfying when you've got a sneaky Claudette annoying their teammates, annoying you, and you're able to find them, and you're able to do something about it. That's satisfying. So yeah, closing with a bit of fun there. Listen, if you're a Claudette main, as long as you work on gens, you're fine by me, however you choose to play. But I'm mostly teasing. But there are others Claudettes that just do not work on gens. They don't work the objective. They just hide and they try to just survive long enough to either, get out the exit gates because their teammates did the gens or slip through the hatch or just, I don't know, see how long they can survive that way. But that's not a fun play style to play with as survivor. It's not a fun play style to play against as killer. So when I'm the killer and I'm able to find one of these sneaky Claudettes not working on gens but trying to hide from me, that's fun. That's satisfying. So putting it up an A. Again, ending on a bit of fun, but there you go. All right, everyone, there is my tier list on the most satisfying things I find to do in Dead by Daylight playing as the killer. Let me know down in the comments. Where do you agree? Where do you disagree? What are the things that you would rank higher as more satisfying than I did or less satisfying than I did? What are the things that I completely forgot to even put on this list that you find satisfying to do in the game playing as the killer? That being said, if you enjoyed the video, give it a like. Helps me out a ton. Also, if you'd like to subscribe to see more of my content, I'd greatly appreciate that. And before you go, here are another couple videos that I think you would like, so go ahead and click on those, give them a watch, let me know what you think. And as always, you've been awesome. Stay awesome, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.